Hey guys, tonight we drift deep into sun-baked stone corridors, past the whispering palm trees and the papyrus-fringed courtyards of ancient Egypt, where the dead were buried with gold spells and, yes, occasionally a very pampered monkey. You're standing in the middle of a tomb chamber. It's cooler than you'd expect, even with the desert sun pounding the rocks above. The air smells of dried lotus petals and something faintly resinous old incense, maybe, or embalming oil, that's long since stopped being polite about its presence. There's a low painted bench against the wall. It's too small for a person, just right for a monkey. Not the big screeching kind from modern zoos, but a small wide-eyed creature, curious, clever, and undoubtedly a bit of a menace when left near anything fragile. This tomb, it belonged to a court official high-ranking enough to own property, host elaborate feasts, and be buried with some of his most treasured possessions, including apparently a monkey named something like Henu. You don't know how the name survived. Maybe it was scratched into a wall. Maybe whispered in the funeral chants. Maybe it was simply written on the underside of a tiny silver bracelet that just happened to fit a monkey wrist. What you do know is that ancient Egyptians didn't exactly see animals the way we do. They didn't just love them. They worshipped them. They feared them. They dressed them in miniature tunics, gave them wine at parties, and taught them how to entertain guests by climbing up amphorae to grab fruit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you tuning in from? Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little caravan of curiosity stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward in the sandals on your feet soft against the limestone floor and gaze up at the painted ceiling. There next to the sun boat and the jackal-headed Anubis is a monkey, sitting hands clasped in prayer, wearing what looks suspiciously like eyeliner. Historians still argue whether that monkey represents a divine messenger or a literal pet. Some say it's symbolic. Others say it's just a really beloved sidekick. You imagine the monkey hopping onto the scribe's lap, smudging fresh ink, maybe even biting the corner of a tax ledger just for fun. Some things never change. But here's the strange thing. That monkey, it didn't just live with its owner, it died with him too. Monkeys were embalmed wrapped in linen, sometimes treated with the same reverence given to priests. One was even found with a necklace of faience beads and a tiny bronze mirror. A gift, an afterlife accessory. A keepsake for grooming those impossibly twitchy eyebrows. No one's quite sure. But what you do know is this: if you were rich enough in ancient Egypt, you didn't just take food and furniture into the afterlife. You took companionship, mischief, comfort, something soft and warm to sit beside you while your soul navigated the bureaucratic maze of judgment. You picture the final ritual priests intoning mourners weeping. The monkey perched obediently on the sarcophagus, blinking slowly, possibly bored. And then silence. Centuries pass. Sand drifts in. Dynasties crumble. Names are forgotten. But the monkey, still there, still watching, still part of the story. Even now as you stand here, that little creature seems to nudge your imagination. Not with words exactly, but with presence. A kind of quiet insistence that says, hey, I mattered, even if I chewed on the linen robes, even if I stole the grapes. And maybe you smile just a little. Because it's oddly comforting, isn't it? To know that even in death someone wanted company, and that sometimes the best choice for that role had a tail. You squint toward the desert horizon where the golden light hums, and the heat warps the dunes like they're exhaling. In the distance, a caravan approaches, slow, rhythmic, and slightly chaotic, because somewhere in the middle of the camel-laden train, there's a monkey, clinging to the shoulder of a trader, clutching a dried fig in one hand and a shredded bit of cloth in the other. It chatters noisily, totally uninterested in border protocols or import taxes. Because you, my friend, are now entering the realm of foreign monkey trade in ancient Egypt. These weren't your garden variety temple cats. These monkeys were exotic, imported, and likely smuggled in ways no customs office would endorse. Most came from further south Nubia or the mysterious land of Punt, which scholars still argue may have been somewhere near modern Eritrea or Somalia. What's certain is that the Egyptians treated Punt like a source of all things spicy, fragrant, and mildly chaotic. Frankincense, gold giraffes, and monkeys. A typical expedition might bring back sacred oils, resin-soaked wood, and one particularly irate baboon who hated boats but loved grapes. And here's the fun detail. Wall paintings from the reign of Hatshepsut, the only woman bold enough to call herself Pharaoh with full regalia, show monkeys as diplomatic gifts, a kind of thank you for not invading us party favor. You imagine the scene, a royal reception in Thebes, nobles fanning themselves, and a monkey gently pooping on a priceless carpet. Charming. Historians still argue whether the monkeys were symbolic gestures or actual long-term pets. But one thing is clear, they made an impression. Some were given handlers. Others were dressed in tunics. A few, if legends are to be believed, were trained to retrieve fallen objects during royal banquets. The ultimate ancient butler. But transporting them, that was a whole production. Picture a monkey in a wicker crate halfway across the desert swaying as the camel lumbers on. It gets fed dates, yells at passing IBCs, and possibly picks a fight with a goose during a rest stop. You know, standard monkey diplomacy. It wasn't easy. Survival rates weren't great. But when one made it, it became more than a pet. It became a status symbol. If you were a priest or noble and you owned a monkey, you were saying, I have power, I have reach, and I have something wildly impractical that eats figs and ruins papyrus scrolls. You walk into a villa courtyard now. Columns line the space and a small pool glints in the shade. There's laughter, fruit platters, a harp playing in the background, and in the rafters, a monkey, swinging lazily, watching everything, waiting for someone to leave their wine cup unguarded. Monkeys were associated with foreignness, with luxury, with the chaotic but magnetic power of elsewhere. And the Egyptians, so obsessed with order and symmetry, were ironically also deeply fascinated by these creatures who defied both. They carved them into cosmetic boxes. They painted them beside dancers. One monkey statue even had a mirror embedded in its paws because apparently ancient monkeys cared about appearance too. Or at least the humans thought they did. You wander over to a stone relief half-buried, sun-worn. There's a monkey drawn with delicate lines riding a donkey and wearing what looks suspiciously like a feathered crown. Why? Who knows? Historians have long debated whether this image is satirical symbolic or some long-forgotten in-joke. But here's the part that sticks with you. Someone cared enough to carve it. To give that monkey not just a presence, but a persona. It wasn't just a pet. It was a character in their story. You lean back against the wall listening to the wind comb through the reeds. In the quiet, you can almost hear the distant patter of feet, bare and tiny, skittering across sandstone, darting past scribes and noblemen alike. And with that soft rustle comes the realization. The monkey was never just decoration. It was presence. It was foreignness in motion. It was Egypt looking outward. And also, maybe, just maybe, it was comic relief. Because even ancient civilizations needed a little chaos to balance their pyramids. You step into the atrium of a grand estate. Not your estate, of course, but you're here on business or maybe by accident. The floor is smooth alabaster, slightly cool beneath your sandals. Date palms rustle in the courtyard. And lounging on an embroidered cushion near the reflecting pool, delicately picking through a bowl of figs, is a monkey wearing a gold collar. This, you realize, is not just any monkey. This is a status monkey. If there was an ancient Egyptian version of Instagram, this monkey would have had a private papyrus scroll, a ring light made of polished obsidian, and more followers than your cousin who owns a linen factory in Memphis. Wealth in ancient Egypt wasn't just shown through how many servants you had or how large your tomb would be. It was in the details. Rare cosmetics, scented oils, imported myrrh, and yes, a living creature that could balance on a wine jug while shrieking at guests. Pharaohs and elite priests loved to display foreign animals, giraffes, leopards, even cheetahs on rare occasion. But monkeys, they were something different, less deadly, more mischievous, and highly portable. Some nobles even paraded their monkeys through the city streets, letting them ride in decorated baskets or peek from behind silk curtains and palanquins. You imagine being a scribe sweating through another inventory scroll and looking up just in time to see a monkey toss a grape at your head from a royal litter. Symbolic, maybe. Hilarious, definitely. Historians still argue whether the monkey's primary role was as exotic companion or subtle spiritual protector. But we do know this. They showed up in art not just as passive pets but as active figures, playing instruments, harvesting fruit, even dancing. You stop at a wall painting in the house's inner chamber. There, painted in ochre and lapis, is a monkey playing a lute. His little hands are oddly graceful. His head tilts like he's concentrating, and nearby, a noblewoman claps along. You try not to overthink what this means for the local music scene. But the point is clear. These monkeys weren't hiding in the corners. They were part of the household, given names, given collars, and in some cases given their own servants. We have records, believe it or not, of caretakers assigned to tend these creatures, feeding them pomegranate seeds, brushing their fur, occasionally chasing them down when they broke into the pantry. They were expensive to keep. They required special food, imported treats, and frequent damage control. One ancient papyrus even contains what may be the first recorded complaint about a monkey knocking over ceremonial oils during a feast, the modern equivalent of your dog eating your tax return. Still, the value remained. Monkeys offered more than entertainment. They were a living novelty, proof that you had power stretching far beyond the Nile. And when those monkeys died, they didn't just disappear, they were buried, honored, sometimes even mummified, wrapped tightly like a small priest laid to rest beside their owners, as though the afterlife might also need entertainment or fig thieves. Back in the courtyard, a servant brings a small bronze bowl of water. The monkey dips its hand, then flings a few drops your way. Not out of malice, just because it can. You take that moment, that tiny, chaotic flick of water, and realize status wasn't just about having power over people. It was about curating your surroundings to reflect your reach. And nothing said, "I've made it," quite like a creature from another continent stealing your lunch and being too cute to punish. You're sitting now in the shade of a temple wall, the sandstone warm at your back, and before you an old priest murmurs something to the gods, or perhaps to the monkeys. Yes, plural. Because here's where things get even stranger. It turns out that in some parts of Egypt, monkeys weren't just imported curiosities or spoiled companions. They were divine messengers, or possibly gods themselves. Or maybe just very enthusiastic stand-ins. Historians still argue whether monkeys were sacred in and of themselves, or simply borrowed divine status from the gods they were associated with. But the fact remains, when the ancient Egyptians looked into the eyes of a monkey, they saw something more than a fruit thief. They saw a reflection of Thoth. Yes, Thoth. That multi-talented god of wisdom, scribes, and moonlight, often shown with the head of an ibis, sometimes with a full baboon form. Thoth was everywhere. Books were kept, contracts were signed, or lunar cycles were plotted by anxious astrologers. And the baboon version of Thoth, extra mystical, extra unpredictable. You wander through a painted hall where moonlight glints off polished tiles. On the far wall, a troop of baboons, serious, bearded, solemn, raise their arms in worship to Ra, the sun god. It's not a joke. This was real worship, real veneration. Monkeys, particularly baboons, were believed to greet the sun each morning with a kind of squeaky reverence. Which makes sense, really. They're naturally noisy at dawn. And if the Egyptians heard that sound at sunrise, it wasn't just background noise. It was a sacred chorus. Imagine waking each day not to a rooster crow but to a baboon bellowing its divine approval of celestial motion. A little terrifying, a little holy, and entirely on brand for ancient Egypt. Baboons were given ceremonial roles, guardians of temple thresholds, scribes of the afterlife, lunar companions. They weren't just animals, they were gatekeepers. One funerary text even describes a baboon seated beside the scales of judgment, where your heart is weighed against the feather of Mayat. No pressure, right? You picture it now. Your immortal fate hanging in the balance while a monkey peers down at your soul with the kind of expression that says, "Really, you brought that into the afterlife." But here's a twist. Not all baboons were treated equally. Some were wild-caught and trained. Others were raised in temples, hand-fed, and recited to as if absorbing holy wisdom through osmosis. And occasionally, one went rogue. There's a fragmented record about a baboon at a temple in Thebes who reportedly bit a junior priest during morning rites. The text doesn't say what happened next, but it does contain a suspicious gap followed by a section on proper monkey binding knots. You shift on the warm stone floor now, half listening to the breeze rustling papyrus stalks outside. And you wonder, did people genuinely believe monkeys were divine? Or were they simply hedging their bets? After all, if you're going to feed a monkey every morning and clean up after it every evening, it's much more comforting to think it's sacred. And if it occasionally throws something at your ceremonial sandals, well, that's just divine mystery, isn't it? Still, you can't shake the image of that painted relief, the baboon calm and wise holding a scroll in one hand and a stylus in the other. Not quite man, not quite God, but somewhere in between. You wander now through a necropolis. The air here is still dry and heavy with the scent of stone, if such a thing can be said to have a scent. Dust clings to your sandals. You pass rows of tombs carved neatly into rock walls, each belonging to someone who had enough clout in life to be embalmed, decorated, and serenely sealed away for eternity. But something odd begins to appear. Smaller tombs, narrower, less elaborate yet deliberately placed. You glance down and see inscriptions less legible, sometimes rushed, but one word jumps out again and again: Khefu, a name. But not a person's, a monkey's. Welcome to the afterlife section where the monkeys go. Because believe it or not, some of these pampered pets weren't just buried, they were mummified with full honors, swaddled in linen, interred in tiny sarcophagi, and sometimes given their own tomb inscriptions, names, deeds, and all. You pause before a cracked relief showing a monkey sitting beneath a tree nibbling a fig. It's almost funny, except the scene is solemn. Reverent. This wasn't doodled in someone's lunch break. It was carved by someone who genuinely believed this creature mattered, maybe in life, maybe in the afterlife, possibly both. Historians still argue whether monkey burials reflected affection or religious duty, or both knotted together like the linen shrouds they were wrapped in. But the evidence is real. Entire pet cemeteries have been found in places like Saqqara. One particularly famous baboon was entombed with a bronze mirror-scented oil and what appears to be a tiny toy cart. That's not just burial, that's legacy. Imagine someone sat down with a priest, maybe a scribe, and said, "Yes, I'd like to ensure Khefu has safe passage. Also, he really liked dates. Can we pack some of those?" You wander further. One tomb shows a man reclining at a feast. Above him, a monkey balances on the rim of a large wine jar, tail swishing lazily. Is it symbolic? Is it autobiographical? Was this monkey real? You'll never know. But the image has weight. Even now, thousands of years later, there's something quietly moving about that. In a world obsessed with eternity, the Egyptians still made room for companionship. Not just love in the abstract, but the messy, mischievous, grape-stealing kind of love you get from a creature that might wake you up at sunrise by clanging a bronze bowl. And maybe that was the point. In life, these monkeys brought chaos to order. In death, they were honored like family. Back in the dry breeze of the necropolis, you stop beside a tiny coffin. The name is half erased, the carving faint. But beside it, clearly visible, is the outline of a paw print. Not majestic, not fierce, just familiar. It's hard to say why, but you smile. Because somehow the idea of someone leaving behind a carved reminder of a monkey's foot feels more human than anything else you've seen all day. You step now into a quiet chamber painted from floor to ceiling in scenes that pulse with color even after thousands of years. Ochre lapis and faded red streak the walls like a dream. You tilt your head upward and there they are again. Monkeys, everywhere. In one mural, a monkey balances expertly on the back of a crocodile holding a lotus bloom. In another, it scales a date palm with the speed and confidence of someone who definitely does not have permission to be up there. One sits cross-legged beside a nobleman paws in a bowl of honey. Another appears to be playing a harp. A harp. It would seem that if you wanted your tomb to feel like home, you didn't just paint yourself surrounded by children or wealth, you included the monkey too. And sometimes more than one. In one famous fresco from Theban Tomb 100, you can count 5 monkeys all engaged in wildly different activities. One's mid-jump, another's stealing bread. One, curiously, is pouring what might be beer into a cup while a scribe watches with silent resignation. You can't help but laugh quietly. Some things really never change. Egyptologists are still debating the exact roles of monkeys in these paintings. Were they symbolic of joy, exoticism, controlled chaos? Or were they just ancient memes, little jokes left on the walls by painters bored with all the funerary pomp? One theory suggests that monkeys represented a kind of liminal figure, part human, part animal, part servant, part jester. They existed at the boundary of order and disruption, the perfect addition to a world preparing you for the unpredictability of the afterlife. You sit down near a column and trace the edge of a painted vine, the leaves curling toward a seated monkey who, if you squint, seems to be giving you side-eye. You wonder if the original artist meant it that way or if you're just projecting because it reminds you of someone from your own life. Maybe an uncle, maybe your roommate in college who used to microwave tuna. Still, it's charming. It's unexpected. And it suggests something important, that even in death, Egyptians wanted a touch of whimsy. There are even instances where monkeys show up in banquet scenes frolicking beneath tables as guests laugh and eat and drink wine sweetened with dates. These weren't solemn funerals, they were eternal parties. And what's a party without at least one uninvited monkey climbing on the furniture? A particularly odd example painted in the tomb of Nebamun shows a monkey riding a donkey. The donkey appears unfazed. The monkey seems delighted. You imagine someone asking the artist, "But why would a monkey be riding a donkey?" And the artist just shrugging and answering, "Why wouldn't it?" There's something soothing about that logic, because not everything in the tombs is stiff or symbolic. Sometimes it's just delight. Joy frozen in plaster. And monkeys seem to be joy's avatar, unpredictable. Funny, a little inappropriate, but impossible to ignore. As you prepare to leave the mural chamber, you catch one last image, a monkey curled beside a sandal. Eyes half closed, tail wrapped protectively around a jug, not dancing, not climbing, just resting. It's probably the most peaceful one yet. And somehow that's the one that stays with you. You descend now into the deeper vaults where the light grows thin and cool, and silence gathers like linen around your shoulders. Here, past the grand murals and loud banquet scenes, is where the serious business of eternity begins, and apparently where someone once decided to mummify a monkey. Yes, really. The linen-wrapped bundle in the corner of the chamber isn't a human child, though it's small enough to fool you at first glance. It's curved in that unmistakable way, knees, drawn-up spine, arched hands tucked close. If you lean in not too close, you can just make out what was once a face, delicate, long-snouted, probably a vervet. This isn't an anomaly. Across ancient Egyptian sites from Thebes to Abydos, archaeologists have found mummified monkeys, often carefully bandaged, sometimes with gilded cases or painted faces. They were laid beside nobles, pharaohs, high priests never just tossed in. These monkeys had names, and someone paid for their preservation. Historians still argue whether this was affection, religion, or politics. Maybe it was all three. But there's no doubt it took serious resources to mummify even a small creature. They had to be bathed in palm wine packed with resin-soaked linen organs removed when possible small monkey organs are fiddly, then dried and wrapped layer by loving layer. And sometimes someone even added amulets, tiny beads, or faience charms nestled against the monkey's ribs. You imagine a temple scribe tucking in a scarab charm, muttering under his breath, For your next life, Keifu, may it be banana-rich. There's a fringe theory that some monkey mummies were more ceremonial than personal, offered to gods like Thoth in great batches by pilgrims. But others, more carefully placed, uniquely wrapped, seem deeply individual. You don't embalm 50 monkeys with little bronze mirrors just for tax reasons. One particularly bizarre case involved a baboon mummy whose linen wrappings were embroidered with gold thread, a status usually reserved for pharaohs. Scientists were baffled. Was it a royal pet? Was it symbolic? Was it some ancient prank? The truth is still undecided. But the stitching was real. And the smell, if records are to be believed, was equal parts frankincense, pine pitch, and something faintly resembling burnt coconut. Apparently, monkey mummies required an entirely different blend of preservation spices. You duck into another chamber and spot a different style altogether. A painted wooden box in the shape of a seated baboon with a little hinged door in its chest. You open it gently. Inside, a scroll fragment. No monkey, just a prayer. Was this box once used to house both, or was the monkey always metaphorical? These are the kinds of questions that fill scholarly conferences with passionate arguments and a surprising number of hand gestures. But here, in the cool silence of the tomb, you feel something more intuitive. Whatever these monkeys meant, companion, guardian, jester, soul mirror, they meant enough. Enough to preserve, to ritualize, to grieve. And in the end, that's what lingers. The image of a priest 2,000 years ago tying the final knot on a monkey's linen shroud, whispering the name one last time before sealing the tomb. Keifu, or maybe Beniti, or maybe something lost to time. But someone knew it once, and they loved that little creature enough to carry it into forever. You turn down a passage whose walls shift from painted celebration to something stranger, more intimate. The figures grow smaller. The detail becomes obsessive. You're in a cluster of private burial chambers, now the kind reserved for officials, priests, and very rich eccentrics. And tucked into one shadowed niche, a monkey sarcophagus. Not a box, not a bundle. An actual sculpted sarcophagus about the length of your forearm, covered in carved hieroglyphs, with a stylized monkey face staring out from the lid. It's slightly chipped. The nose is missing, but still, it's unmistakably monkey. You lean in to read the inscription, what's left of it. Roughly translated, beloved companion, agile of spirit who brings joy to the garden. You try not to get emotional, because clearly someone did. This wasn't a mass-produced offering. This was custom work. Someone went to the trouble of hiring a sculptor to shape a coffin that reflected their pet not as an offering but as a person, a being. Historians still argue whether these were truly pets or something more: status mascots, ritual helpers, or tiny spiritual guardians. But the existence of carved-named monkey-sized coffins suggests a level of personal investment that can't be shrugged off as symbolism. In the tomb of a noble named Neferhotep, there's a depiction of a monkey lounging on a carved stool. Yes, his own stool beside a brazier, and what looks suspiciously like a bowl of pomegranate seeds. The monkey is labeled "He Who Warms the Heart." Not a bad epitaph. Nearby, another chamber once held the remains of 3 monkeys, each in its own coffin, stacked like sacred nesting dolls. Only one has a name preserved: Jehuda Mose. No records remain of who the owner was. But judging by the gold leaf traces and the intact perfume jars still left beside the coffins, they were someone of serious wealth, and someone who cared. There's even evidence that some of these monkeys were buried with letters, rolled papyrus scrolls containing prayers, instructions, or most heartbreakingly farewells. One such scroll reads, "May your mischief charm the gods. May your paws be gentle in the reeds of paradise." You smile, because now you're picturing the field of reeds, the Egyptian heaven, as a lush monkey paradise full of fruit trees and unlocked storage jars. And yes, it's probably not accurate, but it feels right. Back in the tomb, a tiny bronze mirror leans against the wall. You pick it up and see that the back is carved not with a goddess, but with a monkey holding a lotus. It's absurdly cute, which feels almost out of place among all the solemn death rituals. But also it fits. Because maybe that was the point, a reminder that not everything sacred had to be serious, that companionship mattered just as much as kingship, that a monkey once loved deserved a little bronze vanity too. You gently return the mirror and step out, leaving behind the quiet room where a monkey sleeps forever beneath carved stone, remembered not for his tricks or lineage, but simply for being joyful. You emerge now into a temple courtyard washed in pale morning light. The scent of incense lingers dry and spicy, drifting over limestone walls etched with stories. And in the corner beneath a weathered frieze of the moon, God Thoth, you see something unexpected, a monkey, carved in stone, sitting calmly beneath the god's ibis-headed figure like a quiet sidekick to divinity. You raise an eyebrow, because this isn't just another pet tribute. This monkey, most likely a baboon, is part of a religious tableau, which leads you down a curious trail. What exactly was the monkey's role in Egyptian theology? It's here you start to untangle one of Egypt's more whimsical divine relationships. Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, timekeeping, and moonlight, was often associated with two animals, the ibis, long-beaked and elegantly weird, and the sacred baboon, grumpy-faced and emotionally intense. Historians still argue why this was. Some think the baboon's dawn howls reminded Egyptians of chanting priests greeting the sun. Others point to their uncanny ability to sit in judgmental silence for hours, a trait any proper god of cosmic accounting would admire. One ancient myth even describes baboons as celestial scribes, recording the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Maat. Imagine that, in your final moment, your moral worth being judged by a furry scribe with sideburns, a quirky detail. According to some Greco-Roman accounts, temple baboons were believed to recite prayers, though modern scholars suspect this was less divine chanting and more high-volume monkey shrieking at sunrise. Still, it got the job done. In Upper Egypt at Hermopolis, archaeologists uncovered entire cemeteries filled with baboon remains, some mummified, others buried in neat rows. These weren't pets. These were sacred animals, likely raised and cared for by dedicated temple workers. Picture rows of baboons lined up in reed pens being fed, bathed, and prepped for spiritual duty. One fringe theory suggests these monkeys even had designated keepers, a kind of ancient zookeeper-priest hybrid, whose entire job was to interpret baboon moods and make sure no one got bitten before the solstice. And yes, you're imagining it now, a sunburnt priest crouched in the sand whispering to a baboon like it's an oracle. If he flings the fig, the omens are bad. You can't prove it didn't happen. What's clear is that these monkeys weren't just decorations. They were mediators, bridges between human concerns and cosmic order. Their presence in temples wasn't decorative, it was devotional. You pause beside a tall column where a faint carving still survives, a baboon seated on a crescent-shaped throne, paws raised to the stars. The artist didn't need to explain. It makes sense in its own dreamy way. Because in a world where gods had falcon heads, crocodile jaws, and sun discs on their foreheads, a moonlit monkey wasn't the strangest thing to worship. It was maybe one of the most relatable. You linger for a moment longer. The wind whistles softly past the broken walls, and you picture it again, an early morning ceremony. Incense rising, priests chanting, and somewhere nearby, a monkey awake before everyone, watching the stars fade. You follow a shaded corridor, now walls narrowing, as if the architecture itself is trying to whisper. What you're heading toward isn't a grand hall or crypt, but something more personal. A scribe's chamber. A place where ink once stained fingertips and monkeys may have wandered underfoot, chasing dropped reeds. You enter, and there it is, etched into the wall just above the writing bench, a monkey doodle. Not an official deity, not a ceremonial baboon, just a scrappy little sketch. Long limbs, wide eyes, tail curled like it's mid-trouble. It's tiny, tucked in the corner like someone snuck it in during a slow temple shift, and it makes you smile, because clearly not every monkey in ancient Egypt was a religious symbol or beloved pet. Some were simply around. Underfoot, loud, distracting, and oddly charming. In fact, Egyptian art sometimes captures this beautifully. In papyrus scrolls and wall fragments, you find monkeys doing absolutely ridiculous things. Drinking wine, playing harps, climbing fig trees they definitely weren't supposed to climb. In one particularly chaotic mural from the tomb of Rekhmire, a monkey is shown riding a donkey backward, an act that even 400 years later still screams, "I do what I want." Historians still argue about whether these depictions were symbolic satire, real-life snapshots, or just ancient artists having a slow afternoon. But what's certain is this monkeys were known observed and delighted in. And then, there's the question of hieroglyphs. The ancient Egyptian word for monkey was often written with a small pictogram of the animal itself, tail curled, arms out. Occasionally, scribes would get creative. Some examples show monkeys drawn mid-leap, mid-squabble, or even mid-poop. Yes, that's real. These weren't mistakes. They were flourishes. A scribe's wink across centuries. One scholar, cheeky as ever, once described these monkey glyphs as the emoji of the temple. You imagine the ancient version of a bored apprentice doodling in the margins, carving little primates into wax tablets when no one was looking. A quirky tidbit for you: in one lesser-known temple record, a monkey is blamed for stealing a royal decree scroll. Whether this was metaphor or a genuine excuse for bureaucratic chaos remains unclear. But it's a vivid image, a monkey bounding across the sand. Ancient legislation clutched in its tiny hands, pursued by 3 frantic scribes and a man in very expensive sandals. Even in sacred texts, monkeys found their way into the narrative, sometimes as metaphors, sometimes as troublemakers, and occasionally as wise observers. Some fringe theories suggest that a few scribes kept monkeys as inspiration, the way a poet might keep a finch or a programmer keeps 12 browser tabs open. The monkey wasn't just decoration, it was mood. Back in your little scribe's chamber, you run your fingers over the bench wondering what stories were written here, what secrets transcribed, and whether once the scrolls were rolled and sealed, someone reached down and offered their monkey a fig as a reward for being mostly well-behaved that day. The chamber holds no grand treasures, but it holds something better: evidence of everyday affection, humor, and the quiet comfort of sharing space with a creature who was never quite tame and never boring. You drift now through a garden path, well, what remains of one. Crumbled limestone borders, faint outlines of irrigation channels, and a few fig roots stubbornly clutching the dry earth. But your guide tells you this was once the sanctuary of temple animals. And yes, among them, monkeys. But these weren't just loose, loud pets chasing butterflies. This was structured, ritualized, a kind of soft bureaucracy of the sacred, somewhere between zoo and monastery. Because in certain temples, especially ones dedicated to Thoth, monkeys had caretakers, individuals responsible for their feeding, bathing, grooming, and even mood tracking. You picture it: a man in a white linen kilt holding a bowl of fermented date mash, whispering softly as he tries to coax a baboon down from a column ledge. Nearby, another attendant fans a grumpy macaque who refuses to nap without his favorite stone toy. It might sound silly, but it was deadly serious. Because temple animals were considered living extensions of divine will. Their health reflected the temple's health. Their mischief was studied like prophecy. Their happiness was somehow a cosmic duty. Historians still argue whether these monkey caretakers were full priests or lower-ranking attendants. Some suggest they had ranks of their own, keepers of the moon, scribes, or overseers of the sacred chatter. The titles aren't confirmed, but wouldn't that be something? There's even one crumbling tablet unearthed near Tuna El Gebel that refers to he who speaks with the dawn howlers. No one knows exactly what it means, but it's haunting in a sleepy kind of way. You come across a relief showing one such caretaker offering fruit to a monkey seated on a throne. Not perched. Seated. The baboon's tail curls like a question mark, and beside him, a bowl of honeyed cakes. You blink. Because honey wasn't cheap, neither was the careful labor of drawing that bowl. It all speaks to value, not just financial, but emotional, spiritual, symbolic. These monkeys weren't just pets, they were ritual participants. In some ceremonies, it's believed they helped mark time, howling at dawn, signaling certain parts of the liturgical calendar. In others, they were simply present, a divine presence in fur. A quirky detail. There are depictions of baboons clapping during temple rites. Whether they were trained or just really into percussion remains unclear. You imagine one clapping wildly out of sync, earning a withering glare from a nearby cat god statue. And then there's the offering lists. Some temples had daily schedules for feeding the animals grain, fruit, water. Occasionally, beer, and yes, beer. There's a reference to a monkey feast day involving fermented barley mash and dancing. One festival fragment reads, "The joy of the moon, beast echoes in the courtyard. Give figs without counting." That's the kind of policy you could get behind. And perhaps most curious of all, some temples buried their monkeys ceremonially with rites almost indistinguishable from human funerals. Linen wrappings, perfumed resins, amulets, and recitations of the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Because even in death, the monkey mattered. You step into the garden's shade one last time, pausing beside a carved stone trough. A small paw print is still visible in the dust-hardened rim. Fossil decoration. Or maybe just a monkey who centuries ago dipped his hand in the water, flicked it dramatically, and moved on, unaware that thousands of years later, someone like you would smile at the mark he left behind. The sand crunches differently now beneath your feet. Coarser, richer. You've entered a royal necropolis, the famed Valley of the Kings, or rather one of its quieter offshoots. This isn't the bustling tour zone of Tutankhamun's golden mask. This is a tomb corridor seldom visited, and today, you're not here for the pharaohs. You're here for the monkeys. In recent excavations, archaeologists stumbled upon something odd: tombs that belonged not to kings, but to their companions, attendants, and intriguingly, their animals, including monkeys. Yes, monkeys. Not just thrown in for spiritual flavor, but intentionally preserved, carefully placed, and often given more thoughtful burial treatment than your average middle-class merchant. The find that turned heads: a tomb near Luxor, dated to the 18th dynasty. Inside, wrapped in linen, placed in a fetal position, and surrounded by fruit offerings was a monkey, possibly a vervet or a Barbary macaque. Beside it, two alabaster jars, one filled with dates, the other with dried papyrus blossoms. Historians still argue about who this monkey belonged to. Some believe it may have been the pet of a princess. Others think it was part of a temple ritual and buried by caretakers. One fringe theory even claims the monkey was buried to guard its master's soul in the afterlife, a kind of celestial doorman with opposable thumbs. You step closer to the rock wall. Here, etched faintly into the plaster, is the monkey itself. No stylization, no cartoony flourish, just a quiet portrait. Round eyes, long limbs, tail tucked neatly around its feet. It's touching. It feels like a goodbye. A quirky find nearby. A monkey-sized collar made of faience beads arranged in an elaborate lotus pattern. This wasn't mass-produced jewelry. This was bespoke. Likely handmade by someone who genuinely cared whether or not their monkey looked fabulous in the afterlife. You picture the scene: an elite woman, perhaps stroking her pet's head on a warm afternoon. She instructs the artisan to make something fit for a god, not realizing that centuries later it would end up behind glass in a museum, puzzling modern researchers. And what of the tomb's architecture? Some chambers that housed monkeys also contained doll-like statues, carved wood figurines of humans and animals arranged like a household. In one, a monkey figure sits beside a woman figurine, both staring toward the west wall, where a painted sun dips below the horizon. Was this symbolic? Was it meant to comfort? Or was it merely practical? The monkey had been part of the household, so naturally it was brought along. One papyrus fragment even records a complaint. The monkey will not eat and the lady is distressed. That's it. No conclusion. Just an ancient Egyptian moment of primate sulking and domestic anxiety. It's these little glimpses, half preserved, half mystery, that bring the tombs to life. They weren't sterile crypts. They were memory vaults, scenes of affection and loss, and yes, even monkey drama. You exit the tomb slowly, running your hand along the stone doorway one last time. There's a small indentation there. Not symbolic, just a worn groove. Maybe the monkey passed this way often. Maybe it sat here, watching the workers carve, watching the sun rise and set, completely unaware of its future mythic fame. And now you follow it out into the evening heat, still watching, still listening, still wondering why a monkey might be the final companion someone chose to take beyond the grave. Now you're wandering farther downstream toward the harbor cities where monkeys didn't just live, they arrived. Because not yet. Every Egyptian monkey was born under the Nile sun. Some came by boat, others by caravan, all of them tied to a surprisingly busy economy of fur, fruit, and friendship. You're standing on the docks of ancient Pelusium, watching a ship unload. First come the amphorae of olive oil, then the baskets of dates, then a crate shifts. Something screeches. A curious nose pokes out between the reeds. Monkey, fresh off the boat, imported from Nubia, Punt, or possibly the land of the incense trees. A luxury creature, a diplomatic gift, a taxable item. Yes, that's right. In some trade records, monkeys are listed by weight and assessed value grouped right alongside ivory, myrrh, and lapis lazuli. Historians still argue whether these monkeys were captured as wild pets bred locally or exchanged in formal agreements. There's a scroll in the British Museum that simply reads 2 jars of frankincense, 1 monkey, and 1 female dancer from the south. No further details. You'll just have to imagine the customs officer's face. A quirky tidbit. Some monkeys were smuggled tucked inside grain shipments or disguised as temple offerings. One scribe even scratched a complaint on a clay tablet. "This monkey bites. I want the good kind next time." You can't make this stuff up. Walking past the docks, you spot a small cage with woven sides and fig leaves scattered inside. A young boy feeds the animal slivers of melon. It shrieks not out of hunger but delight, then promptly throws the melon at your foot. Clearly, this one will be someone's problem soon. You continue through the bazaar, where monkey accessories are now a minor industry. Leashes of dyed papyrus, custom collars, even toys made from knotted palm fibers. You pass a vendor shouting temple-trained noise discipline sleeps through thunder. Right. As if monkeys come with user manuals. And yet some people believe they could be domesticated. Elite homes sometimes had courtyards with carved perches or mini monkey temples. Wealthy children were occasionally gifted monkeys instead of cats. One ostraka, a kind of sketch/grocery list, includes a line that reads, "Need fish onions and monkey comb." Monkey comb. These weren't passing amusements, they were household fixtures. But they weren't cheap. To own a monkey meant you had servants, food surplus, and time to spare, cleaning up after a very nimble rascal who believed every fruit bowl was its rightful throne. And yet, Egyptians kept importing them, feeding them, naming them, even writing songs about them. There's a surviving fragment of a harpist's hymn that mentions a laughing shadow with the tail of a rope. Scholars think it was about a monkey that used to dance on command during feasts. Whether that's heartwarming or mildly terrifying is entirely up to you. As the market winds down, you pass a final stall. It's selling statues, little faience figurines, each about 2 inches tall. Almost all of them are cats' gods or royalty, except one. A monkey seated, arms folded, with what appears to be a cheeky smile. You pocket it. After all, every trip deserves a souvenir. You drift now into a quiet corridor of a memory, a palace garden that no longer exists, paved over by centuries of dust and empire. But in your mind it flourishes. Olive trees stretch lazily toward a burning sky dappled with shadows of sycamore and date palm. In the center, a fountain shaped like a lotus. And beside it, a monkey, not scampering, not chained, just sitting there, watching. The monkey belonged to Queen Tiye, or so the legend goes, one of Egypt's most powerful royal women, wife of Amenhotep III and grandmother to Tutankhamun. Her portraits show a woman of intense eyes and elaborate hair, a figure of formidable presence. And tucked just behind her in one rare wall carving, a monkey with gold hoops in its ears. Historians still argue whether this was a symbolic companion or a literal one, but the detail feels too lovingly rendered to be mere decoration. Some texts from her era describe small monkeys trained to retrieve fruit dance during festivals, and even alert the guards by chattering at strangers. Royal alarms essentially adorable, unpredictable, and shrieking at everything. A quirky tidbit from a court scribe's record. The monkey would not wear the crown for the feast. Her Majesty found this amusing. Apparently, there had been an attempt to dress the monkey in a ceremonial headpiece. The monkey had other plans. In the royal nursery, monkeys likely entertain children, though entertained is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Imagine a toddler chasing a tail while the monkey climbs the furniture and pelts figs at the nursemaid. And yet, some monkeys behaved more like lapdogs. One letter from a palace steward laments, "The little one will not eat unless she sits beside the queen." Little one in this case almost certainly not a child. You pass under a colonnade, now your sandals echoing. A breeze carries the smell of jasmine and incense, the kind they use during late summer ceremonies when offerings were made to Hathor and the sun's heat grew sticky with meaning. Beside the ceremonial pool, another stone carving two monkeys, one grooming the other. A simple scene, intimate, quiet. And here's the twist. This carving wasn't meant for tourists. It was placed behind a private wall, viewable only by a handful of royal women and their attendants. Why? Perhaps it was just a fond memory. Perhaps it held symbolic value. Or perhaps someone missed their pet. Because for all the gods and gold and war and grandeur, Egypt was still a place where people cared deeply, sometimes absurdly, often beautifully. Even about the animals that stole their fruit, disrupted their feasts, and refused to wear crowns. And in this moment, surrounded by fading murals and ghost pool reflections, you feel the thread of it all. The humanness, the silliness, the affection. You sit where the monkey once sat on warm stone overlooking a dry fountain. The world is quiet now. But for just a moment, it isn't hard to believe a tale once curled here. That a little creature once blinked up at a queen, accepted a piece of melon from her hand, and lived out its days under fig trees and moonlight knowing it was adored. You're walking one final corridor now. A narrow passage lined with painted stone and ancient breath. It's cooler here. The air smells of myrrh and dust and the soft rot of centuries-long offerings. Somewhere nearby, a monkey is sleeping forever. You kneel by a small limestone coffin. It's maybe 2 feet long. The lid is carved with an elegant curve, and faint traces of pigment suggest it was once painted blue. You touch the edge, cool, smooth, quiet. Inside, archaeologists once found a single monkey skeleton perfectly arranged, arms folded, legs tucked, jaw slack with what looks almost like a smirk. Beside it, a tiny ceramic bowl once filled with honey dates. Why honey dates? Some believe it was the monkey's favorite food. Others suggest it had ritual meaning. A few even argue it was symbolic, a gesture of sweetness for the afterlife. Historians still debate whether monkeys were buried for companionship, religion, or status maintenance. Some tombs show monkeys seated beside their owners facing west, the symbolic direction of death and renewal. In others, the monkeys rest alone, almost like guardians, or perhaps castaways. You run your fingers along a line of hieroglyphs. The symbols translate loosely to beloved creature, keeper of joy. Not exactly theological, but very human. Another tomb contains wall art, showing a man fishing, a woman plucking lotus flowers, and yes, a monkey stealing fruit from a basket. All painted in eternal loop to play out forever in the afterlife. An ideal world apparently includes a little chaos. In a quiet niche behind the burial chamber, you spot one more carving. It's rough, unfinished, probably drawn by a child. It shows a monkey and a girl both seated, legs crossed, arms raised. Maybe dancing, maybe arguing, maybe just being what they always were, companions of a sort, linked not by ritual but by joy. The ancient Egyptians had a word for solka. They believed it could inhabit statues, linger in tombs, or follow you into the afterlife. Did monkeys have kai? No scroll confirms it. No priest ever declared it. But judging by the care taken, the amulets, the burials, the songs, the art, you'd be forgiven for thinking so. And maybe, just maybe, in the quiet dark of the underworld, a few souls walked side by side with small tail-flicking shadows at their heels. Companions to the end and beyond. You stand brushing sand from your robes. The tomb fades behind you. You're not sure if the monkey was a pet, a spirit, a prankster, or a priest. But you are sure of one thing. Someone loved it enough to keep it close. Even here, even now, the stones beneath your feet soften. The air grows warmer. The garden returns, palms swaying in slow rhythm, fountains whispering again in the distance. You hear a rustle in the fig tree, a quiet chirp, a soft giggle that might not be human. The monkey's presence is still here, not loud, not demanding, just watchful, loyal, curious, asleep beside a carved bowl of fruit that will never spoil. The scent of resin drifts by, sweet, deep, familiar now. And as the tomb door closes gently behind you, sealing centuries in a hush, you realize it never felt like a crypt. It felt like memory, like affection given form, like a story that didn't need explanation, just a tale curled beside a sandal and a pause long enough to remember. Your breath slows. The sand settles. The monkey curls tighter into the shadows, eyes fluttering closed beneath golden lids painted thousands of years ago. Still waiting, still guarding, still dreaming of sun-warmed stones and fig slices and gentle laughing hands. Sleep now. The tomb is sealed, but the affection, it lingers, always.